Hi, I'm Charles Hudson, President of Shoo-fly Incorporated. I want to thank you for the opportunity of sharing with you some of the products of Shoo-fly Incorporated. I also want to thank you for selecting them and purchasing. The purpose of this tape is to give you instructions on how to use and install the automatic fly spray system and to mix and dilute the insecticide that you use in it. The first step is to unpack the drum. The products that we have here will be totally inside the drum, and when they come, they'll be coming by motor freight. Once you pick them up, take the top ring off, lift the top off, and unpack the drum. Once you have it unpacked and you set everything out, go through your inventory and make sure that you have all the products that you have ordered and that are necessary to install the system. The next step is to go to the barn and determine how you're going to run the tubing. There's several ways to do that, and what I'd like to do is take a second and show you how to do it. If you take a normal barn, and I'm using a barn here with a center aisleway and stalls located on each side, and possibly a feed room and a tack room. The first step would be select the place that you would like to put the unit itself. And for this purpose of this tape, we're going to go ahead and just select a unit and put the unit in this corner and call that a tack or a feed room. And then coming up from there, the purpose then is to run the tubing and the nozzles over the top and the center of each stall. And selecting the point in the center where each nozzle will be located. On a center row barn, we also recommend that you put nozzles down through the center. Somewhere in that location. These lines are run continuously all the way around the barn to this point. At this point, you put a T in here, run one line directly back and back to the master unit, and at this point in the master unit, you put a cutoff valve. The purpose of the cutoff valve is to bleed the air out of the line so we have no hydraulicking within the system itself, and we will come back to that in just a minute. This is a typical barn that you're going to find up north. One of the other constructions that we have as far as barns are concerned is a center barn where the stalls are back to back. And we usually find these more in the southern part of the United States. And that's where you have a large roof area, and then you have stalls that are run back to back. On this situation, we do the exact same procedure. We decide on where the nozzles should go, and they should go primarily through the center of each stall, around the stall, and back to the unit. The unit, in this case, may be outside here, or one of these rooms might be designated as a feed room, and then it's run up and teed into it. Then we have a nozzle over the top of each one. And actually, when I say teed into it, actually, I should not have used that phrase. Actually, it comes into it, and then this line is run back, and the cutoff is put here. Where you have a return back to the drum. Once you've decided on how you're going to run your tubing in your barn, then probably the next step would be at deciding on what you're going to connect the tubing to. There's a number of different methods of doing this. Most every barn that I've seen have got electrical conduit similar to this PVC pipe that we have here for a demonstration in the studio. And you can take your twist ties of this type, tie it around the pipe, and use this to hold your tubing. From this, now when you get ready to decide to put your tubing up, the optimum height on the tubing is between 10 and 12 feet. And this has got to do with the construction of the barn. Occasionally, I have found a situation where we have exceptionally a high roof structure on the barn. And when we have a high roof structure on the barn, for example, if we're going to use this for a ground elevation, and you're going to have a series of stalls going down through here and your stall doors. However, excuse my art, and then occasionally you'll end up with a roof situation much higher than what the barn is. Then occasionally we'll have to come up and we'll have to put cable from one end to the other and actually tie your nozzles on the cable to get the proper height. On some of your northern barns over here will be constructed with roofs and ceilings over the top of each stall. We have found in the past that it's actually better, rather than stretching the tubing down the outside of each one of the boards, is to actually take a drill and drill through each board, and then run the tubing through it and mount the nozzle directly in the center. And the reason why we do this is occasionally these particular type of roofs will be down somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 or 10 feet, or maybe even lower. I've seen them down as low as 8. And a horse has got the capability of reaching up and grabbing the tubing. By running the tubing as close to the top of the stall as we can, sometimes this deters that and makes it more difficult. The horse is not as obvious to the tubing, and he will not grab it and pick it up. This type of method will work fine on stalls that are finished of this texture. There's occasions that come along when a person has got an exceptionally nice roof and interior in the barn, and he doesn't want to have the nozzle exposed. Well, right here, what I did, I took a 3/4 inch drill, which is the same size as the barrel of the nozzle, and drilled a hole up through so as you can insert a nozzle from the top down. Now, it's important when you drill this hole, it's important to drill it from the side of the wood that you wish to protect up. This occasionally it'll splinter at the top, and you'll have a problem with splinters when it comes through. So that's why I recommend drilling it in the direction of the wood that you don't wish to protect. Okay, and then on top of this, for example, we'd be basically in the attic right now, going down on top of the stall. You can insert the nozzle and run your tubing and run from stall to stall, just like we did here. And I don't know if you can see this nozzle, it comes through just about a 1/2 inch and gives you a very nice looking finish. Occasionally you may elect to run your tubing across the rafters because you have no tubing or pipe or conduit to tie into. When you do this, I recommend using a Romex staple. The Romex staple is very inexpensive and it's easy to use, but the thing you have to be careful about is when you drive it in and across the tubing, you have to make sure that you do not pinch the tubing. Do not use the Romex staple either to hold the nozzle or use a Romex staple around the nozzle. use it to go around the tubing, but the tubing should be free so it can slide between and you can take the slack out. If this is indented into the plastic, when the plastic is activated, and I shouldn't say plastic because it's not plastic, it's nylon. When it's activated and it goes to 160 pounds of pressure, you do have some expansion out of the tubing. So don't get it too tight. Don't have it indented within the tubing. On the nozzle, I recommend driving the staple in the same direction as you're running the tubing. Run a tie through, wrap it around your nozzle, and I usually wrap it around twice. Pull it snug, and then continue on to the next one. This makes a very neat application, and you do have control of the nozzle, and the nozzle will be pointing in the direction that you choose for it to be pointing in. Upon occasion, you run into a large system where you have to use a great deal of nozzles. And when you do this, it's always best to use a manifold or larger tubing coming up to the system. In fact, even on some of the smaller ones, anytime that you get over 20 nozzles, you need to almost use a manifold. Come up with a manifold and divide the nozzles up. For example, like this. If you have a normal barn, just like we drew just a minute ago, with many stalls in it, what I like to see happen in a situation like this is when you decide on where the unit's going to be, let's say if it's going to be in here, for example, I like to come up from the tank to the line with a piece of 3/8 inch tubing. Now, 3/8 inch tubing carries almost twice as much actual fluid to the system as a 1/4 inch. And so it would look like this when you hooked it up. You use 3/8 tubing up, arrive at the 1/4 inch, and continue on around. And I also tried to divide the nozzles up if at all possible. For example, in putting nozzles at each place, and if you exceed the 20 nozzle limit, run your in for your aisleways. What I like to do is come up with 3/8, like I said before. In this particular case, I put a T in here, and of course nozzles throughout this side. Bring a bleeder line in from here, come across, pick up this bleeder line here with a brass figure called a cross, and then continue back to the drum with a cutoff. But the primary thing that I want to show you here is the fact that you use a 3/8 into the center of the nozzles so you have an equal amount of pressure going all the way around the system. Once you have selected the means that you're going to put in your tubing and how you're going to run it, then you need to start putting together your nozzles and selecting the tools that you need to do it. Actually, the way the system goes in is very simple. The tools that you'll need are a hammer, maybe 2 crescent wrenches, a pair of end cutters, a screwdriver, a saw, and upon occasion a drill. The drill is usually used for going through, to come out of a tack room, possibly up through the roof, and to get the tubing from the tank and the unit up to the lines that you just got completed running. But before you get started on that, we need to take and start assembling the nozzles. The nozzles are made up of 3 components: a male branch T, an adapter, and the nozzle tip itself. On every joint where you have metal to metal, I recommend using Teflon tape. And it's usually adequate to put a turn and a quarter around the Teflon tape and screw the unit together. Then add your nozzle, and then use your crescent wrenches to tighten it down. You probably need to use this and put it in a vise where you can put enough pressure on it. And if you have several of them to do, I recommend doing it that way your hands don't get tired and fatigued from doing it. When you tighten this down, one of the things that you have to remember about is brass is it's always a tendency to over-torque the brass. Once this is screwed down and it feels firm, stop. A leak is easily taken out, and when you have the Teflon tape, the chances of a leak are very slim. On the main nozzle itself, when you tighten the nozzle down, once you screw this in hand tight and it reaches the adapter, then take your crescent wrench. It only takes about a 1/16 of a turn, and it's seated in. On the nozzle itself, when you hook it to the tubing, we have a small brass insert that we slide inside the tubing, and then we slide the tubing in to the side of the nozzle. And this is the procedure for assembling it. Screw this together finger tight, and then tighten down with your wrench a turn and a quarter. Again, I emphasize, do not over torque your brass. It's easily to be stripped out.